But what we are going to focus on in this session is focusing more on growth roles. When I say growth roles, these are roles that contribute to businesses directly. A few, where we are going to talk about what are the skills that are required. We'll go deep into each and every aspect of it in a while. The hiring process, basically, once you're done with your MBA, what kind of process does the recruiters follow when they are hiring MBAs from these schools? What are the typical things that you need to understand when it comes to the company and the insights? What could be your possible career paths after an MBA, or how an MBA can help you do that? And finally, understanding the importance of network and career management, right? So that's pretty much what we're going to focus on in the session today. Over to you, Siddharth. So maybe you can get started with telling us a little bit about what are the different kind of growth roles, and we can take it from there.
Sure, Shrikala. Thank you so very much. So the way I would define a growth role is anything that expands the business or the customer base, which inadvertently touches on the revenue as well, right? So all of those roles that directly impact, as Shrikala said, is what I would also say is a growth role. The list here is not exhaustive, but just to give some feelers of what these roles could be. Business development, as the name suggests, there is a growth involved there. It could be sales, it could be pre-sales, it could be customer success management, but all of those form part of the developing the business. Consulting is a growth role. We'll talk about specifics in a while. Marketing, again, the intention of marketing is to expand the customer base and reach out to more markets and more clientele. So there is a direct impact again to business. Growth PMs, product management roles, which are specifically focused on growing the business, the product reach, etc. Partnerships, again, footprint increase. These are not exhaustive, as I said, but these give you some idea of what a growth role could look like in a typical organization, right?
Right.
And if you look at those roles slightly close in a closer fashion, you will see all of them are directly, oh yes, growth role. As I said, Janvi, it's not exhaustive. There could be so many more, completely agree. And what you would notice is all of those skills or all of those kind of roles interact directly with the market or with the clientele. So the skills that you see here are generally what the role would also demand: communication, articulation, right? Strategic thinking, the ability to understand the client's mindset and numbers and figures. So analytics is definitely important. Also, from a business development or sales perspective, it is important to also understand the market that you're entering to, right? So all of those, the roles that you saw typically demand these type of skills. Again, it is not exhaustive. There could be so many more skills that would be necessary, but this gives you a gist of what these could mean.
So Siddharth, to give an example to the audience here, right? So say, for example, if we are picking management consulting as an option, what could be, how does all these skills actually touch that kind of a role? So say, for example, if people, over here are looking at getting into consulting as an option, where would they use all these aspects in a management consulting role?
Sure. So it's a good thing that you picked that, because all of these skills definitely form part. So let me give an example, right? As a management consultant, what you're expected to do is understand the customer's pain points or challenges. That's step number one. So it is the ability to have the business acumen, the analytical understanding to comprehend the problem itself, right? Without which the next steps will not happen. Once you've understood the problem, once you've comprehended what the problem is, the second stage is the strategic thinking aspect. You're able to think of various solutions, possible solutions. You're able to decide which ones could probably be a better fit in this specific scenario for the client. There is an immense brainstorming session that you would go through. In addition to that, there is creativity in terms of how you want to, portray those kind of thoughts, articulate those kind of thoughts that you have to your customer. Presentation skill is another aspect that would come in, especially for a management consultant, which talks about communication skills. It could be the way you present and the way you communicate your thoughts to a customer so that they understand what your solutions are and how that could impact their business overall. So that's a typical consultant journey. And the last step of the consultant after you present, of course, is the negotiation or the convincing power to be able to convince the customer that one of those solutions is a good fit for their business and they should go ahead and try implementing and executing those. So in a nutshell, you would see bits and pieces of all of these coming into play. Again, not comprehensive, but you'll see areas of these skills coming into a consultant role.
Right. Right. So more from a perspective of, when you look at companies, right? So that I remember speaking to and you mentioning that, you yourself hire from these schools. How does this whole hiring process work in B schools? What do they, so one as like I've heard that, a lot of schools, the hiring process starts right from the first semester itself, right? And some schools it starts from the third semester, and people have different. And in fact, the more important part is the way it works in India versus the way it works in international schools is vast different, right? So how do they go through this hiring process, and how can we'll get to the how can MBA leverage that, but maybe if you could throw some light on the hiring process of how they go through it, and what exactly are they looking at when they are especially in first semester or second semester, if they are hiring, the MBA is not even sunk in for most people. So, what are they looking at and what is the process that they would follow?
Sure. So I think there is a vast difference when we talk about hiring from MBA B schools in India and hiring MBA B schools elsewhere. In India, let's talk about that first. I think there the basic threshold for academic excellence or intelligence is already passed because you've managed to get a seat and managed to get an admit to one of these B schools. So there is this intention or the understanding that you're already of a certain caliber, right? Which is why they know you will go through the MBA rigor and you will churn out ultimately having all those skills that an MBA will teach you. So you are actually already employable, which is why you receive these kind of offers or you're in touch with clients, etc., in the first month of your MBA itself in India. And in India, it's also more structured in terms of placements. The companies approach B schools and there is a placement cell where you get an opportunity to meet your desired company hiring teams, etc. Whereas let's talk about elsewhere. Let's say I did it in Singapore. It's a very small market. There is no concept of placement, right? It is more student-led. So from an aspirant perspective, the expectation is that you network with the companies that you want to engage or you want to explore roles for. You engage with these kind of profiles, and it's on your own. So you could reach out to them on LinkedIn or social media platforms or write an email to them, etc. And then network, have coffee, sit down, understand their business, understand their roles, understand what you could bring into the business, etc. So it's very much candidate driven. It has its pluses and negatives, both sides, but it's very different to how India works. So I would say from a hiring perspective itself, that's one difference. But once you've landed a place where somebody is speaking to you, I think what they are looking for is the industry fit. Have you had some industry background? If let's say we're talking about FMCG or you're looking at a tech role, then have you had some kind of an industry background? If not, if you're looking for a specific role, have you done that role or function in the past? That's typically what they would look at. And I'm not here to say that you cannot switch. MBA is one of the biggest tools where you could switch both industries, roles, functions, geographies, all of that. So it's still possible, but that's what they would look at. If it's sales, let's take an example of a sales role. Typically, what they are looking at is, have you performed sales in a specific geography, right? Have you done sales of a certain sales cycle? What is the size of a deal that you might have engaged in the past? So those are kind of topics that they would look at. I'll take an example so it's easier to understand this. So let's say we look for a job in the tech sales market after an MBA, right? It is obviously important for you to know some landscape, some tech landscape. If let's say I'm going into the cloud space, then it's good to know who the cloud players are, what does the landscape look like in that region. And I'm not saying from the technical point of view, but at least a very high level understanding of the competition, the market, the demand, etc., is very important, even though you have not had a background. Sorry, was there a question, Shrikala?
No, so I had one question,
Please.
slightly on one more aspect that you spoke about, right? I'll go back to your previous point, sorry, so that we don't miss out on that.
Sure.
So a lot of these B schools also have career services, right? So international schools I'm talking about. So though they do not have, the placement kind of a format like how Indian B schools have, they do have career services. So
Yeah.
where do they come in and what is the role they play when it comes to B schools?
No, thanks for bringing it up, actually. So the Career Services Office is a helping hand that allows or helps you connect with the alumni who are in that space. So let's say I'm looking for roles in tech and I'm interested in to get into that. They could help make the connect with alums who are already in that space so that you can easily connect and network. That's one way that they can come out and help. Second is they could organize events if there is enough enough interest from the current pool of candidates to have, let's say, a marketing event or let's say a FMCG event. They could help host an event to invite industry leaders, speakers, etc., so that it becomes a more interactive session. So the role of a career placement cell or a career office is very different from what you would expect when you're looking at an Indian setup, right? So yeah, that's how they would operate.
And I think to add to what Siddharth said, there are a lot of these career fairs also that happen across these countries. And what these career services team also does is giving the information to students about those opportunities that are available. A lot of these schools also have internship opportunities which are either structured or unstructured. So based on that, say, for example, an unstructured internship would be, where some startups who do not come regularly, they come and provide internships, which it can eventually lead to jobs. And the structured ones would be, standard companies that come and hire from these B schools every year, right? So that is, so one question, and this is something that everybody asks me all the time, and so that you have gone through it yourself. You are from a completely different industry, which is an energy industry, and you moved on to technology, growth and sales roles, right? So how does this happen? Because to point to your question that you mentioned, right, that there is a little bit of industry knowledge and understanding required. They do look at your prior experience of what you do to give you that opportunity in some way, right? So how does that work?
Yeah. So my first job after my electrical engineering was at Siemens, and it was a tech role, right? I was preparing drawings for the electrical distribution system. So that was entirely a tech role. But during that initial year, I realized that my interest was always to sit in front of a customer, to explain the drawings, to walk through the project details, etc. So slowly and steadily, even during my decade at Siemens, I switched towards more customer-facing roles. It became like a consultant, although it is a tech discussion. Although it was more on what we could do from a solution perspective, from a tech landscape, I was always this conduit between the tech side and the customer. And they called it a different term. They would call it the key account, or rather pre-sales. They give it multiple names, but I knew that my interest and my forte was always talking to the customer, understanding pain points, being able to articulate and see if there's a fitment for our solutions. Now, that was clear, but it was very difficult to switch into a tech industry without having some sort of a background. So when I started my MBA, I knew that in Singapore, the tech landscape has almost 80 of the top 100 tech giants in Singapore itself, right? And what they would all look for is have you had sales? Have you done sales? It need not necessarily be tech product sales, but it could be sales in any form or fashion. That's number one. The second they would look for is, do you have any kind of understanding on the tech side? So I did do small courses and certifications on the cloud, or on the technologies that they would offer on AI, machine learning, etc., just to have basic understanding of what are the kind of technology solutions products that the tech companies would sell. And that would make me more employable. And I also did an internship that was a small bridge between going from an energy sector to a tech sector at a company that was, let's say, a fintech, right? So I was able to bridge that gap. But more importantly, when I completed my MBA, I was open to looking at any sort of tech roles in the sales function without having a filtered view of where I want to land up. I did not choose just the top 10 firms or top 5 firms. I kept my options open, but I knew the function I wanted to get into, and I knew the kind of industry I wanted to get into. The companies were still open. So I think one needs to have a very clear pathway of where one wants to land up after an MBA without narrowing down so much that you're out of options.
Right. How do you how do you get to know about their negotiation skills or fire in the belly aspect of it, when you're hiring or when recruiters are looking at B school candidates?
Well, if you ask me, and my personal opinion, hiring is so subjective. It has been so subjective, and that is something that I feel needs a change. Somebody has to revolutionize and change it. But till then, I think it's going to remain this way. It's always based on gut feel. So when I hire candidates for sales roles, it's not the degrees or those kind of things that really matter the most, especially for a sales function. One needs to have the fire in the belly, the hustling mentality, right? And there is no real way to ascertain this, but it is a gut feel. It is the intent. You get this vibe when you speak. It is subjective, so I completely agree. But there are some skills that you can, of course, understand. Articulation, for example, or negotiation. When you request a candidate to put up a presentation or do a mock pitch, you understand the communication, the presentation skills, the executive presence of the candidate. That's very important, especially when you look at an enterprise sales sort of a function, right? Business acumen or product knowledge, all of those can be taught, but you cannot teach sales. That is my firm belief. You can teach the product, you can teach about the technologies, etc. But the basic fundamentals are something that you either have or you don't have. Right. So that's what I would look at. I know it's very subjective, but that's how I would look at.
Right. And in fact, to give you all an idea on how consulting interviews happen, right? So I was talking to a student and she was telling me about how, and they have like multiple coffee chats and they have multiple assignments that they have to do to get into a consulting role. And it can be, it can start with a discussion saying that, hey, you want to open a business in so-and-so region. What is your approach? So basically your first case study would be around, okay, they are just trying to understand how you think, how analytical you are, what kind of guesstimation you're using to come up with those, theories or assumptions. And then multiple rounds could be around getting more into detail into these aspects, right? To understand more of your analytical skills, your own understanding of industry and the kind of research you could do to come up with your assumptions and, thought processes around it. Any points on that, Siddharth?
Yeah, so when I was in my MBA, there was a chance to do an internship mid-semester, and I did do a consulting stint for 6 months at a consulting firm. The reason I took up that was to strike off for sure that consulting was not my interest area, which is why I took up the internship. The internship was great. It was fun. And there's a lot to learn there. The point that did not really resonate with me was, for a consultant, you do not see the results of your work, meaning you share your your thoughts, your suggestions, and then somebody else comes in to do the implementation. You do not see whether that has fetched the results that you presented, right? And that for me was always a half story. You could never see the end of it, which is why I realized that's not for me. But it was a fun stint and a great line of work to be in.
Right. In fact, that's a point that a lot of people who move from consulting say, which is that's exactly the reason where they don't get to see the execution, and there's always this mismatch around it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, on the next aspect, Siddharth, since you have experience working in APAC and in the technology industry, what I want to understand is, most, I would say 100% roles post MBA are client-facing roles. I don't think any role, because it has to be, something that makes business sense, right? So when we are looking at, say, specific geographies or, specific sectors, what are the typical kind of things you need to focus on? And more from your perspective, why was APAC your choice? And, what was your thought process behind, picking tech as an option for your next step?
Yeah. So if I have to be very candid, the first admit that I got was from Canada. And the places that applied was more to migrate and see, settle down and live there. So Canada was one of the places that I applied to. And I got the admit first in Canada, and I decided to move to Canada. The second admit that I got was in Germany, and I applied there because of Siemens. I had worked in a German firm for 10 years, and it was, a place I knew. Working environment was familiar. So the German admit came second, and then I took up the German admit as well. And then finally Singapore happened, and then I took up the NUS admit as well. So when you apply to different places and you get admits at the different points in time, you're actually spoiled for choice, and you really are, torn between where to go. But I think finally the clarity came from a couple of points. One was Singapore for me was closer to India. You have family back home, it's easier to travel as compared to Canada or other places. The language was another consideration. If you look at Europe or Germany, you need to have German language. And without that, it becomes very difficult professionally as well as in your social life. Canada, to some extent, French was necessary as well. Another thing in Singapore was the kind of firms and the kind of growth that you see here in Asia Pacific was not the same that you would see in Canada or in Europe, right? And I'm talking about 6-7 years ago when I was doing this analysis. I always felt that this part of the world is the most exciting, and this is where I would want to be. And that's why I then, although I had already had sunk cost in Canada and sunk cost in Germany, I said, no, let's come back to Singapore. This looks like the place to be. In hindsight, it makes sense. Today, it's been 7-8 years now in Singapore. Fantastic. In Singapore, the landscape is quite settled for the tech firms. There are about, as I said, 80 to 90 out of the top 100 tech firms in Singapore. Singapore is one of the biggest budding places for new tech startups, fintechs, medtechs, edtechs. All of them branch out from Singapore. In fact, many of the Indian startups, they register the companies in Singapore. They have some teams here. They have businesses here. Although the infra support team sits in India, but it's a very exciting place to be. The industry is very small in the sense that the market is small geographically. So most of what happens here is through networking. So it's easier to meet people. They're very open to you dropping a note for coffee, meeting you for coffee, meeting you for lunches, sharing with you what they've learned, how their journey has been. And it's very easy to network and get through where you want to be, right? So that's been my sort of discovery in the Singapore Asia Pacific market. One of the challenges when you talk of Asia Pacific as a whole is different regions could have different language requirements. For example, if you look at Thailand, you need to have a Thai speaking national there. Or if you look at Philippines, then it becomes another challenge. Vietnam, you have to have the language. Indonesia, you need to have Bahasa. So those kind of local language requirements would definitely come in. But Singapore is still largely English speaking. Australia, New Zealand, English speaking. So there are markets that you could still address with English, but there are certain nuances in the Asia Pacific. Also from a market perspective, right? The dynamics are very different. Singapore or Australia are advanced in the sense that they have deep pockets, very, very developed tech industries. Whereas if you look at a Philippines or a Vietnam, they're still upcoming, and they're very price sensitive. So although it's a one region, APAC, but there are nuances, there are differences, there are different challenges in the region, which makes it extremely exciting to work here.
Right. In fact, I was talking to one of my students who works for people across these geographies. And I remember he telling me that the culture aspect, and especially he was working in the retail industry. And he said that, like, for example, he was looking at Thai, and where they are, Thai people do not eat frozen food. They prefer more fresh stuff, and they prefer more seafood, but all fresh. Whereas at the same time, the other geography that he was working with was Sweden, or where they prefer frozen food, right? It's more like a cultural thing, but it's so different. And the strategy that this retail company would have across these geographies would change just because they have to understand the culture and the market. And that's also pretty much that MBA teaches you, right? So which is when you're looking at these kind of roles and when you're looking at expansion for businesses, these are also the aspects that you need to understand and learn a lot more about, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, please.
I was just saying that in an international MBA, when you're doing an MBA outside of India, you might have a cohort which is quite diverse, right? Not to say that India doesn't have a diverse cohort, but it's more seen when you look at places like Hong Kong or China or Singapore or Europe. You would find so much diversity in the class, and those kind of perspectives, the kind of discussions that you have, would broaden your horizon, and your sort of thinking process changes, your perspectives change. It adds a lot of value apart from the classroom learning, right? The academic learning. These are experience that you really pay the premium for. And that has been quite significant for me when I look at NUS journey.
Right. So that on that, right, on your journey, you've worked across different industries in different roles, even after your MBA. If I have to ask you on some insights on how or what enabled you to move to these roles, across, and now you're working with, a completely different company than which you started with, right? It is in a completely different sector too. So what are your insights from this growth, and how has an MBA actually helped you in some or the other way?
Sure. I think if I look at my journey, the first firm is a German firm, and then worked in an American firm, then for some time in a European firm, and then a Singaporean firm, and now a Chinese firm. So it's very different culturally. All of these are extremely diverse, and you learn a lot from each of these experiences. I'm not saying one was good or bad, but it's very different, and it teaches you a lot of things. But what you really learn from an MBA is the ability to understand bits and pieces of all of this, and to have a broader picture, right? So, for example, when I was at my initial years at Siemens, what I would focus on was the task that was given to me, right? Let's say the task was to prepare a drawing or prepare a electrical network, and that would be my core focus. But what an MBA does is it broadens your vision. You're not looking at the drawing, you're looking at the bigger picture. You're looking at how could your solution help a customer in generating more revenue, right? You're looking at a long-term play with that client. So MBA actually enables you to think in a bigger fashion, right? So all of these MBA grads who come out are actually hired for growth roles because of this reason. They are not any more restricted in their thinking or thought process to a smaller task-oriented approach, whereas they're able to broaden their horizons and think in a larger business perspective and add more value to the client while generating more revenue for the business itself. So that's one advantage. The second was network. And why I bring this up is it's so important in markets like Singapore, which are smaller, or in Spain, etc., where you can actually network with your alums and with the industry peers to learn so much more about what is the kind of job that you would want to do, right? Where would you want to land up? Which companies are good for you? Which companies may not be a cultural fit for you, etc. So networking is so very important. It's not just to land your first role, but it is also important for your career progression and next roles and movement across geographies, etc. So networking is something that the MBA will teach you because your class has so many diverse candidates. And then it becomes a culture, right? It becomes a habit once you start doing it. And especially if you're in a sales role, then it is part and parcel of your daily routine. You cannot do sales without having a network. So that's something that the MBA teaches. And
Right.
from a career path perspective, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, I just agreed to what you said. Please go ahead.
Okay. From a career path perspective, I think it opens up so much more in your mind. So, for example, when I came into an MBA, my essays, if I have to recall, it was more focused towards consulting. And the reason I wanted to do that time was I think that was the norm. Everybody who did an MBA did a consulting job after that. It was the MBBs, McKinsey, BCG, Bain. I still remember my essay had all of these words in, right? But I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure even when I wrote the essays. When I entered the MBA, I wasn't sure, to be very honest, which is why I took up that internship just to strike out and make sure that this is not the right direction, right? So I think it opens up so many more thoughts. So the reason I bring this up is it need not just be the roles that you think of today, but it could open up so many pathways when you talk to people, when you network, when you understand what's possible, what's not, and you hear other stories. It opens up so many thoughts, and which is why you also see people not even entering the corporate roles, but starting off on their own with new ideas. So all of these can shoot out from an MBA.
Right. And I think this is a very important aspect of your journey, and that is the reason why we are conducting these sessions. So for all of you who are attending this session, I think this is what we are trying to do, and this is what our focus is, that when you are looking at it, taking a decision which is something that can be a turning point for your life, right? More in terms of time investment, opportunity cost, obviously money investment, and something that can be completely different than what you are doing currently, right? And to do that, it is very important for you to understand what it takes to get there, and that's exactly what our focus has been through these sessions. So all of you, if you have missed the product management session that we had last to last week, please go ahead and attend, watch that session on YouTube, because you'll have great insights from that too. I'm so grateful for Sid to come over and help us understand the APAC and the technology sales and the growth sales kind of role aspect of it, because this is also something that a lot of people want to know and understand, right? Coming to the next part, right? And I wanted to put a few profiles from obviously I've hidden the name and stuff like that, but I just wanted to show you guys a few profiles where these kind of progressions have been possible after an MBA. And this is a LinkedIn snapshot of someone who's done an MBA from one of the top schools in Europe. And if you see, he or she started with a product manager kind of a role, and then once after an MBA has got into a partner marketing manager kind of a role, right? So this also means that when you say partner marketing plan, if you look at this is Amazon Pay. That is the product that this person is looking at, and ideally the focus would be to have as many vendors as possible onboarded onto Amazon Pay to build their business, right? So that is one example of the kind of roles you could get into. Another thing, this is a LinkedIn snapshot of someone who was in India and has done an MBA from an Indian B school. If you look at it, senior manager, little bit more from a sales kind of a role, has a sales background, and has gotten into global sales roles after an MBA, right? And maybe doing an MBA gave this person an opportunity to go to these global sales kind of roles. The other one over here is, of someone who was in an operations kind of a background, and then, did an MBA from NYU and has gotten into something completely different, right? Management consulting, or, getting into revenue and growth kind of roles. So just to give you an idea, these are the kind of transitions that, people can get into. Before I get on to the question answer session, Sid, I have a question. A lot of people ask me that, and I think I asked this to you in short before, right? A lot of people come with very different backgrounds. Like, for example, if somebody is from, say, an army or a veteran background, or if there is somebody who is from a software engineering kind of a background, or somebody who's from, say, a government sector background. I remember last time in the last webinar, we had someone who said, I work in a government role, right? How can I get into a growth kind of a role, or can I get into a business development kind of a role? Just to summarize what we discussed today, is it really possible? And for whom is it not possible, right? What kind of roles might not or should not get into growth roles? And what kind of, more from a skill sets perspective, how do I identify I can be a great fit for a growth role post MBA?
Okay. I think for somebody who thinks it is not possible, then it is not possible. But for everybody else who thinks there is a way, I'm sure. So without any of these cliches, I think the main thing is transferable skills, right? If you have had a flavor of let's say sales, it may not be exact sales, but if you've had a flavor of it, or if you know how to sell, or if you can show skill sets that are transferable from one space to another, those are sufficient to be able to convince the person sitting in front of you that you have the capabilities to learn and move forward quickly. I think it all depends on how you articulate, how you convince, and how you're able to, place those skills that you've had in the past roles, regardless of where you come from, army, veteran, government roles, etc. But how you position what your learnings were, and how can these complement your skill sets in today for this particular job that you're looking at. I think that's the key. If you're able to match that, then you stand a chance.